Today we got some more actual history about the American Southwest. In this episode, we will hear about an outbreak of the Ute Indians in northwestern Colorado in 1879 near their White River Reservation. The government had decided to simply stop giving the Utes their annual annuities in 1879, and this led them to begin attacking many nearby farms and mining camps. The U.S. troops eventually responded, and this led to a battle at Milk Creek. We will be reading this story from the June 1961 issue of True West magazine. The cover price on this magazine is 25 cents. So here is the story of the Ute outbreak in western Colorado in 1879, after the U.S. government failed to provide their annuities that they had promised in a treaty in 1868. The failure of a Ute Indian agent to hand over supplies and trinkets to his charges on the White River Reservation, and the complacency with which the U.S. Bureau of Indian Affairs acted upon the subsequent complaints, are listed as the main causes of one of the bloodiest massacres ever to take place in the state of Colorado. When Uray's band of Utes was located on the Uncompahgre, and Chief Douglas's Utes were sent to the White River Reservation by the Treaty of 1868, and by later negotiations, the San Juan mining region was surrendered by the Indians, it was provided that each band of Indians would receive certain annuities of money and goods. A large warehouse for the storage of the supplies was established at Rawlins, Wyoming, and the consignments were sent there. The Indians looked forward each year to the time when they were to be presented with blankets, provisions, trinkets, and other items which took their fancy. Nothing made them angrier than for the supplies to fail to arrive at the proper time. In the year 1879, the time for distribution of supplies to the White River Utes came and went, with no attempt by the officials in Washington to hurry the process. In fact, some historians say that the Bureau of Indian Affairs calmly ignored the whole business. The Indians filed a complaint with the agent, and he, in turn, filed a complaint with Governor Pitkin, who sent the petition with his approval to Washington. The joint effort proved useless. Meanwhile, the Utes, now hungry and naked, grew morose and ugly, and began to wander off the reservation to attack the white settlers living in the region, taking their revenge upon the people for the failure of the Great White Father to keep his promises. The agent at that time was N.C. Meeker, a venerable philanthropist who, in 1878, was made agent for the White River Utes at his own request. Meeker's idea was to educate, refine, and Christianize the Utes. He was confident of his ability to bring about a complete transformation in the lives and nature of the wild Indians by teaching them to become tillers of the soil, to live in houses, and to adopt the ways of the white man. Meeker's ideas were noble, but he knew very little about the Indians, and this lack of knowledge was his undoing. The only desire of the Utes, as with most Indians living in that period, was to do as they pleased. If they wanted anything, they were in the habit of taking it, by force if necessary. The Utes looked upon every form of manual labor as intolerable degradation. Their highest ambition was to hunt, kill, and destroy, and their chief pleasure was to drink whiskey and scalp isolated settlers. Meeker's attempts to smother the natural instincts of the Utes were impossible from the outset, but he was determined to prove his faith in the new venture. He took his wife and youngest daughter, along with several other persons, with him to his new home on the Indian reservation. An obstinate and unyielding man, Meeker used methods with the Indians which might have worked with white men, but such methods failed to impress the Indians except to make them angry. The Utes refused to become farmers, and when urged, they got mad, broke all the rules, and went out to wreak their vengeance upon the settlers, stealing their property and setting fire to the protective forests in the area. These depredations by the Utes aroused the settlers, who filed petitions with the governor of Colorado, demanding that the Utes be kept on the reservation. The Indians in turn demanded that their supplies and trinkets be delivered, and while they were at it, demanded that Meeker be removed as agent. The Indians went so far as to send 4 chiefs headed by Captain Jack to Denver for a conference with the governor. Pitkin, seeing that trouble was brewing, advised the authorities in Washington of the situation, and urged them to take immediate steps to remedy the situation, which he hoped would prevent a full-scale uprising. Action was promised, but none was taken. Meeker, in the meantime, requested aid from the U.S. Army headquarters to keep the Indians on the reservation, and General John Pope sent a single company of black cavalry to scout in Middle Park. This was the wrong move to make. If there was anything on the face of the earth that an Indian hated above another, it was a black man, and especially a black soldier. Thus, the movement of black soldiers into the troubled area inflamed the hostility of the Indians rather than quieting it. The Utes kept out of the way of the troops but kept a close watch on them from the hills, wanting nothing better than a good opportunity to swoop down and kill the entire company. More incidents added fuel to the smoldering fire. For example, a Major James B. Thompson, former Indian agent under Governor McCook's administration, bought a ranch on Bear River in Middle Park and built a cabin on the land. Once when he was away from home, 2 Utes named Bennett and Chinaman burned his house to the ground. Thompson appeared before Judge W. E. Beck of the 1st Judicial District in Colorado and swore out warrants for the arrest of the 2 Indians. However, the Grand County Sheriff Marshall Bessie and his posse failed to find the 2 culprits and called off the search. The posse visited Meeker at the reservation but got no help, not because Meeker didn't want to give it, but because his standing with the Utes was poor and he could get no cooperation. The Indians were spoiling for a fight. They fired on white men working in the fields and accused Meeker of writing lies about them in the Denver papers and sending for troops to protect himself from them. Word of the unrest reached General Phil Sheridan, and that famous soldier sent Major Thomas T. Thornburg, commander of Fort Steele, Wyoming, with 3 companies of cavalry to the reservation. No Indians were seen on the trail, but they watched every move the soldiers made. During Major Thornburg's march to White River, the rebellious Indians, led by Captain Jack, attempted to arrange a hearing of Ute grievances before Meeker, with Major Thornburg in attendance. The Indians offered to escort the officer to the reservation and the hearing, but Thornburg refused, expressing the opinion that the offer was only a ruse to draw him away from his men, and possibly to take his life. With this refusal under his belt, Captain Jack made his plans to retaliate. There was only one practical route to the White River Agency, and it lay through a narrow defile with high bluffs on either side. Laying his plans carefully, the wily Ute posted his warrior on either side of the pass, and awaited the arrival of Major Thornburg's troops. When the Army command reached Milk Creek, a tributary of the Bear River 25 miles from the agency, a large band of Indians confronted it in line of battle, and prepared to fight. Seeing that he had been drawn into a trap, Major Thornburg formed his own battle line and awaited the Indians' pleasure, ordering his men to hold their fire until the Utes attacked. With great cunning, the Indians flanked the column. Thornburg's adjutant, Lieutenant Samuel Cherry, was sent out to parley with the Indians, but a shot, whether fired accidentally or intentionally will never be known, pierced the stillness of the autumn day. Immediately on both sides, interpreting the shot as the beginning of an attack, began firing and the Battle of Milk Creek was on. Major Thornburg fell with a rifle bullet through his ear, while riding back to see if the men assigned to protect the supply train were doing their job. After Major Thornburg's death, the responsibility of command fell upon Captain Payne of the 5th Cavalry, who, though wounded, ordered his men to dig trenches and use the wagons and their contents as breastworks. The Indians retaliated by setting fire to the grass and sagebrush, which rolled dense clouds of smoke upon the defenders. With no water to fight the flames, the soldiers had to smother the fire to prevent their wagons from being destroyed. While the white men fought the fire, the Utes posted on nearby bluffs picked off every man and animal to be seen. The troops could neither advance nor retreat. And to make the situation worse, Captain Jack ordered a charge in an attempt to kill the survivors. He was repulsed by a withering hail of bullets, after which he withdrew his troops to the bluffs to continue sniping action. Captain Payne, realizing the hopelessness of his situation, talked with a scout named Rankin about going for help. Rankin proved his mettle by escaping from the trap on horseback and riding toward Rawlins for help, a distance of 160 miles. He made the ride in 28 hours. Seeing that Rankin made it through the Indian lines, Captain Payne sent other riders in search of the Black Cavalry, who were under the command of Captain Dodge. The move was successful, and Dodge and his men rode immediately to the scene in an attempt to rescue the trapped soldiers. The effort was fruitless, however, for no rescue could be effected due to the secure position of the Utes. Meanwhile, the information carried by Rankin led General Wesley Merritt, one of Sheridan's top officers, to collect a large force of men from various posts, and they moved by forced march toward the scene of battle. When the Utes saw this large body of reinforcements, they gave up the fight and rode away. General Merritt's command reached the area early Sunday morning, October 5th, the sixth day of battle. The stench from the decaying bodies of animals was almost intolerable. Many men were dead, and most of those still alive were wounded. After burying the dead and caring for the wounded, General Merritt pushed on toward the agency at White River. Upon arriving at the Indian Agency, General Merritt and his troops found that all the white men had been killed by another band of Captain Jack's men, their houses burned and the women captured. The body of Meeker was found about 200 yards from his home, with a log chain about his neck, a bullet through his head, and part of a barrel stave jammed down his throat. The bodies of 9 other persons, all employees at the agency, were found at various places in the area, all of them stripped and some of them mutilated. After completing their bloody work, the Indians had stolen everything they could carry, packed the plunder on their ponies, and fled the country. For nearly 3 months, Merritt's troops remained in camp at the agency, awaiting further orders. During that period of time, officials appointed by the government attempted to find out why the outbreak started and to discover the identity of the leaders responsible. The investigation was long, tedious, and fruitless. It ended in an offer on the part of the Utes to deliver up 12 of the leaders of the uprising, on the condition that they would be tried in Washington and not in Colorado. Only 1 or 2 of the suspected leaders were ever captured, and none were punished. By an act of Congress, the White River Utes were later moved to a reservation in Utah, and the White River Massacre became a closed chapter in the history of the West. So that's it for this episode about the Meeker Massacre. This included the Battle of Milk Creek, where Major Thornburg and several others were killed, as well as the massacre at the White River Agency, where Meeker and the other white men were tortured and killed, and the women and children were taken as captives. A former Indian agent at the White River Agency named Charles Adams was able to secure the release of the women and children in November of 1879. Captain Jack's band managed to evade capture until April 28, 1882, when soldiers shot him while attempting to force him onto the reservation in Utah. The official casualty counts for the Americans were 24 killed and 44 wounded, and for the Utes 19 to 37 killed and 7 missing. This was a terrible massacre committed by the Utes, but it's also clear that it was provoked by the U.S. Indian Agency not honoring the treaty by simply no longer giving the Utes their annual annuities. This channel is called Unworthy History because we talk about actual history that is now deemed unworthy to show on history channels on TV, and because we talk about people who lived much more difficult lives than we have to today, people whose shoes we are unworthy to stand in. If you are able and would like to support the mission of Unworthy History, then consider joining our Patreon page. Patreon members will have their chosen name listed at the end of each episode. So if you want to see more episodes like this, then be sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time on Unworthy History.